Identify risk is the process of identifying individual project risk and sources of overall project risk and documenting their characteristics. There's a large number of inputs because uncertainty can come from anywhere within a project. The two primary outputs that we'll be looking at are the risk register and the risk report, both of which are created here but then developed progressively throughout the remaining risk management processes. Procurement documentation should be examined because while some contracts may increase or decrease overall risk, it could introduce additional individual project risk. If a seller does not deliver on time, then that can affect our budget. If they go over budget, then we may have some issues with cost reimbursement, just as a few examples. We'll be doing a substantial amount of data analysis in this process. Root cause analysis is one means of identifying possible risk and exploring threats that might result from them. Assumptions and constraints analysis allows us to go back and look at all the things that we're taking for granted or holding to be true without a whole lot of evidence. Assumptions are a requirement for any type of predictive life cycle where we're trying to plan everything up front. However, these assumptions must have their validity tested, and these constraints must be evaluated further. With a SWOT analysis, by examining the current organizational strengths and weaknesses, we can get some insight into future opportunities and threats that we may encounter. A prompt list is a predetermined list of risk categories. This is a great way to go ahead and start capturing risk when people don't know where to start. For example, if we were to start with pestle, first we'd identify any type of uncertainty coming from the political environment, and then we might move on to any uncertainty dealing with the economic situation, and so on. One of the outputs from this process is our risk register. At this point, there's not a lot of detail, but at this point, we don't need a whole lot of detail. We see in the far left column, ABC, this is just some type of unique identification system. This would be defined as part of the risk management plan. Then we'd have a brief narrative description of what the individual risk is. For example, a delay in receiving parts. A potential response is something that we think may work, but we're going to need to do some further analysis before we get there. The reason that we list a potential response this early on, if this risk event occurs before we're able to do further analysis, we may need to go ahead and implement it. And finally, the risk owner. We could assign this to a function, to a department, to an organization, or to a specific person. The risk owner will take this risk through the various stages of analysis and also be in charge of reassessment and implementing a risk response if necessary. The risk report is a document that will present information on overall risk as well as individual project risk that we have identified as part of this process. This document will be updated as necessary as the other risk processes are completed. It includes summary information on the number of threats and opportunities identified, as well as the sources of risk, because if we see that we have a lot of uncertainty stemming from a single area in the project, we might want to go ahead and address that. The metrics for measuring risk, as well as the distribution of risk across various categories and trends that we've identified. Our project documents updates, the assumptions log. Now that we have really tested the veracity of the assumptions that we'd made earlier during planning, we can go ahead and update the assumptions log accordingly. We can also go ahead and record lessons learned. What went well during the identification of risks and what can we do better next time? And also the issue log. We've just finished discussing the identify risk process. Quick learning assessment. What themes or similarities can be seen in the tools or techniques here? The similarities are that we're trying to uncover information. Everything that we're doing here is meant to uncover information about uncertainty within the project. Why are there so many inputs to this process? There's many inputs because there's many sources of risk. Uncertainty can come from anywhere within the project. Who should participate in this process? Project team members, stakeholders, subject matter experts, anybody whose involvement can be deemed appropriate. What types of enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets should be considered here? EEFs could include published information such as studies and checklists, as well as the risk attitudes amongst the stakeholders. OPAs could include project files from past similar projects, especially those that are recent and relevant, as well as any templates or lessons learned that we have access to. Why would you do a SWOT analysis in this process? A SWOT analysis is going to allow us to go ahead and look at our organizational strengths and weaknesses in the current time to establish what types of opportunities and threats we may see in the future. What is the difference between the risk register and the risk report? The risk register is going to have details of identified individual risk, while the risk report presents information on the sources of the overall project risk.